Hey guys, tonight we're starting with something a little stranger than usual, a time when the most sacred work in Egypt happened under the cover of darkness. Not at dawn, not during the golden blaze of noon, but in the invisible hours when the sun had vanished and the living world was supposed to be asleep. In the temples of ancient Egypt, this wasn't the time for sleeping. This was when priests believed the real magic happened. They called it the hour of the hidden sun, a stretch of night so sacred that to speak too loudly in it was to risk disturbing the order of the universe. If you've ever wondered what priests were doing in the middle of the night when no one was watching, well, you're about to find out. Picture this. The streets of the city are silent except for the occasional bray of a donkey or the shuffle of a night watchman's feet on dusty stone. The Nile lies dark and still under the stars. The moon paints silver patterns across the rippling water, but the temples stand even darker, vast stone shapes that swallow moonlight instead of reflecting it. Their gates are shut tight, guarded by men who aren't just there to keep out thieves. They're there to keep out anyone who doesn't belong. Inside, the air is heavy with incense smoke and the faint earthy scent of lotus flowers. Somewhere deep within, a flame trembles inside a lamp that has been burning for years without going out. It's the temple's heart, and it has to keep beating. At this hour, the priests begin their work. They believe the sun god Ra is not absent, but travelling through the underworld, locked in a nightly battle with Apophis, the serpent of chaos. This is no metaphor to them. It's as real as the stone walls around them. The darkness is dangerous. Without the sun's light, chaos can creep in. And so the priests don't simply go through motions. Every chant, every step, every gesture is part of keeping the universe together until dawn. Imagine living with the belief that if you mispronounced a single word of a prayer, the sun might never rise again. No pressure. These midnight rituals are not public. Common Egyptians never see them. Even many lower-ranked temple staff aren't allowed in. This is work for the most purified, the most disciplined, the ones who have been preparing for days. Before the first word is spoken, the priests have washed their bodies, shaved every hair, and dressed in linen so clean it feels almost like air against the skin. They move barefoot across cool flagstones, careful not to speak unless the ritual requires it. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, the priests are waging a war against nothing less than the end of the world. And then comes the sound. The low hum of a chant that begins almost imperceptibly, like the temple itself is breathing. It grows, weaving through columns and statues until it seems the stone might start singing back. Hands lift in the half-light. Incense curls upward toward rafters painted with stars. Somewhere, a bronze sistrum rattles softly, calling divine attention. The god's statue waits in shadow, its face veiled until the proper moment. This is the hour of the hidden sun, an hour meant not for human eyes, but for the gods alone. And yet, in the darkness, the priests are certain, without them, there might be no dawn. The deeper you step into the temple at night, the more the world outside disappears. It isn't just the absence of daylight, it's the way the stone seems to hold its own kind of silence, thick and deliberate, as if every block has been listening for centuries. Moonlight slides through high, narrow windows and falls in fractured patterns across the floor, but most of the temple remains hidden in shadow. What you can see is softened, muted, dreamlike. What you can't see presses in on all sides, alive with the weight of unseen presence. The priests move in slow procession, their white linen catching what little light filters in. The air is warm but still, and each footstep sends the faintest echo curling up toward the painted ceilings. Columns loom like forest trunks in the dark, carved with the forms of gods, kings, and symbols no outsider would dare interpret aloud. Even in this dimness, the paint clings stubbornly to the stone. Deep blues, blood reds, gleaming gold leaf, colours chosen not for beauty alone, but because they spoke a language the gods understood. The smell of incense is stronger here, a dense perfume of frankincense and myrrh that clings to skin and robes. Somewhere ahead, a single oil lamp burns low, its tiny flame catching in the gold of a shrine door. The lamp's light is small, but in this darkness it commands attention, and the priests approach it with measured reverence. To them, it is more than fire. It is a heartbeat, a tether to the divine. Let it go out, and it would be like letting the temple itself die. Every surface inside the temple is symbolic. The floor represents the earth, the ceiling is the sky, painted with constellations that map the divine realm. Walking through this space is a journey through the cosmos. The hieroglyphs etched along the walls are more than decoration. They are living words, holding the very power of speech itself. When a priest runs his fingers across them, he isn't simply touching stone. He is tracing the shape of the universe as the gods wrote it. The inner chambers are even more secretive. Not everyone in the temple is permitted to enter. The deeper you go, the more the air changes, warmer, heavier, thick with the mingled scents of incense and oil. This is the holiest space, the sanctuary where the god's statue waits in stillness, veiled until the moment of awakening. No sunlight will ever touch this place. It belongs to the night and to the rituals that must be performed in darkness. Outside, the moon edges higher, spilling its silver across the Nile. But in here, time has no moon, no stars, no sky, only the rhythm of sacred words and the rustle of linen as the priests prepare for what comes next. Soon, the god must be roused from divine slumber, fed and honoured as if flesh and blood. It is the duty of the priests to make the unseen real, to bring the divine into the waking world. And in this moonlit hush, they are almost ready to begin. Before a priest can approach the god, before a single hymn is whispered or a shrine door is unsealed, there is the matter of purity. Not the kind of cleanliness that comes from a quick wash in the Nile, but a layered, deliberate cleansing meant to strip away every trace of the mortal world. The Egyptians believed that the gods could sense even the faintest impurity, a single careless thought, a lingering touch from someone unworthy, and it would disrupt the ritual entirely. So, before they dared to come near the sacred, priests transformed themselves. It begins with water. Cold, clear and drawn from a basin within the temple grounds, water is poured over the body again and again until the skin tingles. This is not a casual rinse. It is a symbolic rebirth. Each pour washes away dust, sweat, and the invisible shadows of daily life. Some priests will bathe not once, but 4 times during the night, facing different directions each time to honour the gods of the cardinal points. The water itself may be scented with lotus blossoms, believed to carry the fragrance of creation itself. Then comes the shaving. Every hair on the head, face and body must be removed. It is a strange sight. Grown men, their scalps gleaming under torchlight, their faces utterly bare. Hair was seen as something that could trap dirt, harbour insects, or symbolically catch impurity. The priests are stripped of it entirely, emerging smooth and pale as if newly born. Even the eyebrows and eyelashes are taken away. In this form, they present themselves as clean vessels, free of what is unnecessary. Their garments are no less important. They wear fresh linen that has been washed and dried in the open air, untouched by common hands. Linen was the chosen fabric of purity, its whiteness a reflection of light itself. No dyes, no adornments, just plain crisp cloth. It rustles softly as they move, the folds catching faint glimmers from the flickering lamps. Before putting it on, a priest might hold the robe to his lips and whisper a brief prayer, asking that he be worthy to wear it. There is also fasting. For hours before the ritual, the priests avoid food and certain drinks. A heavy stomach, they believed, dulled spiritual focus. Instead, they keep the body light and the mind sharp. They also refrain from certain pleasures, sweet scents, intimate touch, even idle conversation. The tongue must be kept as pure as the hands. Any careless word, spoken in jest or irritation, is thought to leave a stain that water cannot wash away. All of this is done quietly, without rush. The temple seems to hold its breath as the priests pass through these steps. Somewhere outside, the Nile glints under the moon. Crocodiles slip silently through the reeds, and the desert wind rattles the palm fronds. Inside, the priests are stripping away their human layers, becoming something closer to the divine. Soon, they will step into the sanctuary, cross the threshold into the presence of the god. But not yet. The sacred will not be touched until the last trace of the mortal world is gone. Purification in water is one thing. Purification beneath the open gaze of the moon is another entirely. For the priests of ancient Egypt, the moon was not just a light in the sky, it was a living eye, a silent witness that saw through flesh and into the soul. To bathe in its glow was to step into a kind of inspection, a moment when one's purity was not merely declared, but proven. The ritual takes place in the temple's sacred courtyard, a space enclosed by high walls yet open to the heavens. Here, the air is cooler, touched by the slow, deliberate drift of the night breeze. A shallow basin of water waits at the centre, its surface smooth and dark until the moon catches it. When the light strikes, the water turns silver, as though it has been transformed into liquid sky. The priests move toward it barefoot, their steps careful, linen brushing against their legs in soft whispers. They kneel at the basin's edge. Some lower themselves into the water until it curls around their shoulders. Others cup it into their hands and let it spill slowly over their heads. In either form, the act is not hurried. Each movement is deliberate, timed to the rhythm of sacred words murmured just above a whisper. The water is cold, but its chill is part of the awakening, shaking loose the remnants of sleep, sharpening awareness until every sense is alive. The priests believe that in these moments the moon is watching. Its light, pale and precise, is thought to draw out whatever impurity remains, the way a magnet pulls filings from sand. To ensure this, they turn their faces upward, allowing the glow to touch their foreheads, their eyelids, the tips of their fingers as they hold the water. To the uninitiated, it may seem like a strange pause in an otherwise fluid ritual. To the priests, it is as essential as the first breath after birth. The courtyard is silent, except for the quiet lapping of water and the faint rustle of palm leaves overhead. The city beyond the temple walls might as well not exist. In here, there is only the silver pool, the sky above, and the presence of the god carried invisibly in the night air. Each priest completes the bathing in his own time, never rushing another, never breaking the shared stillness. When they rise, water slides down their bodies in thin rivulets, catching moonlight before disappearing into the sand-coloured stone beneath their feet. They dry themselves with linen that has been kept aside solely for this purpose, untouched, unsullied. No one speaks. The absence of words here is not emptiness, but reverence, a shared understanding that the ritual has crossed a threshold. Now, having been cleansed both by water and by light, they are prepared to enter the inner sanctuaries. What comes next will take them deeper into the temple's heart, closer to the presence that must be honoured before dawn. But as they step away from the moonlit basin, each carries with him a quiet certainty. The gods have looked upon them tonight and found no fault. The water has cooled their skin, the moon has examined their souls, and now the priests prepare to clothe themselves in the garments of service. These robes are not chosen for beauty, nor for comfort. They are chosen for meaning. Every fold, every seam, every thread of linen is a layer of protection, both for the priest, who must walk into the presence of the divine, and for the god, who must be approached without even a whisper of earthly contamination. The linen is always white, woven from fibres spun so fine they almost hum beneath the touch. In the dim lamplight of the preparation chamber, the cloth glows faintly, as if holding a piece of daylight inside it. Each robe is kept folded in a chest of cedar, wrapped in more linen to guard it from dust and from hands unworthy to touch it. The cedar adds its own faint perfume to the garment, a dry, resinous scent that lingers even after the robe is worn. Dressing begins with the underlayer, a simple shift of linen that falls from shoulder to ankle, unadorned. This garment is not meant to be seen by the public. It is the skin beneath the skin, a reminder that before one wears the glory of ritual, one must first accept humility. Over this comes the outer robe, longer and heavier, falling in deliberate folds that sway with each step. Some are girded at the waist with a sash, others left loose to ripple like a sail in the desert wind. The act of putting on each piece is itself a prayer. The robe is lifted with both hands, held momentarily at the brow in silent invocation before it is drawn over the head. As the fabric settles, the priest may murmur words older than the temple walls, calling on the god to clothe him not only in linen but in wisdom, patience and steadfastness. Every tie, every adjustment is made with care. Nothing must pull too tight, nothing hang unevenly. Disorder in dress is thought to invite disorder in the ritual. No ornamentation is worn, no gold, no jewels. The linen itself is the ornament, its purity the adornment. Only those who serve the gods may wear it in this way, and only while in the temple. Outside these walls, the robe would be stripped of its sanctity, becoming merely cloth again. Inside, it is a uniform of the spirit, declaring to all present, mortal or divine, that the wearer stands in service. Once dressed, the priests stand in a line for inspection, not of the body, but of the soul, as it is expressed in their readiness. The high priest may pass before them, his gaze sharp but calm, searching for signs of distraction, fatigue or carelessness. A wrinkle smoothed here, a sash retied there, and the moment is complete. They are no longer simply men. They are the appointed servants of the gods, clothed in the authority of the temple. From here, they will move into the fragrance of incense and the glow of sacred lamps, carrying with them the weight and privilege of their calling. The garments are more than a covering. They are a reminder that to serve the divine is to set aside the self, even for just a few hours, and walk clothed in the language of the sacred. The robes are in place, the linen pure and still carrying the cool touch of night air. Now comes the scenting, the invisible armour that will carry the prayers upward and signal to the gods that their servants are ready. In the Egyptian temple, fragrance is not an afterthought. It is a language. Every wisp of smoke from the censers is a sentence. Every blend of resins and herbs a message composed for divine senses alone. The preparation of incense begins long before the night's ritual. Storerooms hidden deep within the temple hold jars of powdered frankincense, chunks of myrrh dark as polished amber, and blocks of kaifi, a sacred mixture whose recipe is guarded like a royal secret. Kaifi is more than incense. It is a potion of scent, created from honey, wine, raisins, juniper berries, and exotic resins, all ground and pressed together until the blend seems to hold both sweetness and shadow. When burned, it releases a fragrance that clings to the skin, lingers in the hair, and seeps into the very stones. Priests select the ingredients with care. Each is weighed on small copper scales, every measure precise. A grain too much of one resin can alter the entire message of the scent. The powders are poured into bronze bowls, mixed with deliberate strokes of the hand. This is not simply preparing fuel for fire, it is composing an offering, one that will rise invisibly to the heavens. The censers are small bronze vessels, suspended on chains, their bowls deep and blackened from years of use. A coal, glowing with steady heat, is placed inside. The incense mixture follows, and the first tendrils of smoke curl upward, slow and searching. The scent is immediate, sweet, resinous, and rich, carrying with it a faint bitterness that sharpens the senses. The priests pass the censers between them, letting the smoke flow over their robes and into their hair. It is as if they are bathing again, this time in air made holy. Fragrance to the Egyptians is breath itself. To breathe the scented air is to breathe in the presence of the gods. The smoke becomes the breath of the divine, moving through the temple, touching every carved wall, every painted ceiling, every shadowed corner. It coils around the statues of the gods, curling beneath their veiled faces, announcing softly, "The servants have arrived." The censer chains jingle faintly as the priests walk, their pace slow, their steps in rhythm with the long exhalations of smoke. They pass through the outer chambers, filling them with the perfume, preparing the path to the sanctuary. The fragrance will linger long after the night's work is done, clinging to the air until the next evening's ritual. Even those who come to the temple at sunrise will catch it, faint but unmistakable, and know that the gods were honoured in the night. When the censers are placed before the sanctuary door, the smoke gathers thickly, turning the air into a haze of gold and shadow. This is the threshold. Beyond it lies the god's resting place. But before the door is opened, another offering must be made. one not of scent, but of substance. The gods must be given food for the night ahead. The air is now thick with perfume, the sanctuary door still closed but almost breathing with the heat of the incense. In this moment the priests turn their attention to what must be placed before the god. The offerings are not chosen for abundance alone, they are chosen for precision. Each item carries its own meaning, its own connection to myth, and its own place in the delicate etiquette between mortal and divine. The first is bread, round loaves, soft yet firm, baked earlier in the day within the temple's own ovens. Bread is the foundation of sustenance, the symbol of life itself. In the dark hours before dawn, it is offered not for the god to eat in any literal sense, but as a reminder that the god is the source from which all life is nourished. These loaves are placed on small reed mats, their golden crusts catching the flicker of lamplight. Next comes beer, brewed thick and cloudy from barley. It is poured into polished jars whose wide mouths release a malty, faintly sweet aroma. Beer in ancient Egypt is not just a drink, it is a daily staple, a gift that turns grain into something alive and sustaining. To place it before the god is to acknowledge the transformation of the ordinary into the sacred. Alongside these are cuts of roasted meat, goose, beef, or goat, depending on the temple's means and the god's traditional preference. The aroma mingles with the incense, creating a strange harmony of earth and heaven. Meat is a rarer offering, its richness a sign of deep respect. Not every temple could afford it every night, but when it is given in the spirit of honouring the god, as one might honour a visiting king. Fruits follow, dates dark as polished wood, figs swollen with sweetness, clusters of grapes resting on shallow ceramic plates. These are the gifts of the fertile Nile Valley, reminders of the god's role in keeping the land abundant. Sometimes honey is offered, thick, golden and glistening under the lamplight. Its sweetness is considered almost divine, a pure distillation of sunlight and flowers. But not all offerings are for the mouth. Jars of scented oils, lotus, myrrh and almond, are placed alongside the food. These are for anointing the god's image, for keeping the statue's wooden or stone body supple and fragrant. Even the smallest drop carries the weight of devotion. The arrangement of these gifts is deliberate. Each plate, each jar is set in precise alignment, forming a pattern before the sanctuary door. The priests work silently, their movements practiced until they seem like part of a single slow dance. To rush would be to insult the god. To place something carelessly would be to invite imbalance. When the last item is set down, the offerings become more than food and scent. They become a feast for the unseen. The priests step back, hands lowered, eyes cast down. For now, they wait. The sanctuary is still closed, but soon it will open, and the god will be awakened to receive what has been prepared with such care. With the offerings laid out and the air rich with incense, the priests now turn toward the inner route that will take them to the sanctuary itself. These are not ordinary corridors. In the architecture of the Egyptian temple, every step closer to the god is a step deeper into a controlled, symbolic universe. The pathways are guarded, not always by men, but by rules, rituals, and invisible boundaries as powerful as any locked door. The first stretch is dim, lit only by oil lamps set into shallow niches in the wall. The light falls unevenly, throwing long shadows across hieroglyph-covered stone. The priests walk slowly, not because the way is difficult, but because the ground they tread is already considered holy. The air changes here, cooler, denser, as if the walls are holding in centuries of whispered prayers. Along these corridors, the walls are alive with images, processions of gods, pharaohs offering gifts, the great solar bark sailing through the night sky. To the casual eye, they might be decorative. To the priests, they are living reminders of the journey they are making. Every carved figure, every painted scene is part of a cosmic map, guiding the way toward the heart of the temple. Some corridors are physically guarded by temple sentinels, men who stand silent and still, their linen kilts crisp, their eyes following each movement. These guards are not there to challenge the high priests, but to ensure that no one unworthy follows in their wake. Even a minor priest who has not undergone the proper purification would be stopped here. The sanctity of the path is absolute. At certain points, the route narrows. Doorways framed with massive stone lintels mark the thresholds between one sacred zone and the next. Passing through is not simply walking, it is a ritual act. The priests pause at each doorway, murmuring brief invocations or touching the stone with their fingertips before crossing. These gestures acknowledge the liminal nature of the space, where one realm ends and another begins. The floor underfoot changes too. In some stretches it is smooth, cool limestone, in others carefully fitted sandstone slabs. Each shift in texture signals a new phase of approach. Some areas may be slightly raised, as if to remind the priest that he is climbing toward the place where heaven touches earth. The silence is profound, broken only by the faint crackle of oil lamps and the soft whisper of linen robes brushing against skin. Even the sound of their own footsteps seems subdued, swallowed by the stone. The corridors are long, but the journey feels timeless. In these moments, the outside world, the Nile, the markets, the fields, fades to nothing. There is only the path, the smoke, the dim golden light leading forward. At last, the priests reach the final guarded point before the sanctuary door. Here, the incense hangs heavy, forming a curtain between them and the inner chamber. The air feels different, charged, as though unseen eyes are watching from beyond the threshold. Soon the door will be unsealed. Soon the god will awaken. But before that moment comes, the priests must perform the most delicate act of all, the rousing of the divine presence itself. The sanctuary door looms ahead, its cedar panels bound in bronze, the hinges dark with age but still strong. It is more than an entrance. It is the final veil between the mortal realm and the god's dwelling place. For hours the priests have prepared themselves, and now, at the appointed moment, the high priest steps forward. With hands raised, he recites a short invocation, words meant to both request and announce their entry. Only when the final syllable fades does he place his palm against the door. The bronze fittings give a low, resonant groan as the barrier swings open. Inside, the air is close and heavy. The space is small compared to the vast outer halls, yet it hums with presence. Here stands the god's image, carved in wood or stone, often gilded and inlaid with precious stones. The statue is not a mere representation, it is a vessel. The Egyptians believed the god's essence could inhabit it during rituals, making this chamber the literal meeting point of heaven and earth. The figure's face is veiled, shrouded in a fine cloth to protect it from unworthy eyes. Even now, only the high priest may draw that veil aside, and only after the correct prayers are spoken. This unveiling is not symbolic alone, it is an awakening. The act tells the god, "We are here. It is time to rise from your rest." The moment is delicate. The priests believed that if they rushed, stumbled, or spoke wrongly, they could invite offense, disrupting the harmony between the god and the temple. The high priest approaches slowly, holding a small scepter or ritual wand. The others stand back, heads bowed. He speaks the awakening formula, ancient phrases whose meaning has been preserved word for generations. These are not casual greetings. They call the god by their most secret names, names that carry authority over the cosmic order. As he speaks, the veil is lifted, revealing the god's face to the lamplight. What follows is a series of gestures that both greet and tend to the divine image. The statue's body may be lightly anointed with scented oil, smoothing over the carved surface as though refreshing the god's skin. A fine cloth may be used to wipe away any trace of dust, symbolically removing the residue of the mortal world. Fresh garments, tiny robes woven from immaculate linen, are draped over the statue, replacing the ones it wore during the previous day. This is not dressing a figure, it is caring for a living presence. Incense is renewed, the thick smoke curling upward around the statue, wrapping it in fragrant clouds. Small lamps are set closer, their light flickering across gold, stone, and gemstone eyes that seem almost to watch in return. The god is now considered fully awake, alert, and receptive to what the priests have brought. This moment is the turning point of the night. From here, the god may be fed, sung to, and honoured with the full ritual sequence. But without this awakening, without the formal invitation for the divine to dwell in its image, everything else would be hollow. Now, the god is present, and the night's true service can begin. With the god now awake, the offerings that have been waiting outside the sanctuary are brought forward. This is not a hurried procession. Each item is carried in silence, two hands supporting it as if holding something fragile. The priests know that what they carry is not just food, it is the translation of devotion into form. To feed the god is to acknowledge that the divine sustains life, but also that the bond between mortal and deity must be nourished in return. The bread comes first, laid upon a low altar before the statue. Its scent is still warm from the oven, faintly sweet with the grain of the Nile Valley. The loaves are arranged in neat rows, their golden crusts catching the lamplight. To the priests, bread is more than sustenance. It is the symbol of Ma'at, the universal order the gods uphold. Without Ma'at, there would be no harvest, no bread, no life. Next comes beer, poured slowly into polished jars until the air smells faintly of barley and fermentation. Beer is not an indulgence here, it is daily life transformed into an offering. Its frothy surface reflects the dancing flames, and as the jars are placed before the god, the high priest murmurs a blessing that likens the drink to the waters of creation itself. Fruits follow, ripe figs, glistening dates, clusters of grapes heavy on their stems. They are piled in small baskets or set on shallow plates, the colours vivid against the pale linen they rest on. The sweetness of these fruits is not just a pleasure, it is a reminder of the Nile's generosity, of the balance between flood and planting, between labour and reward. Meat, when available, is presented with even greater care. Roasted goose, slices of beef, rich foods that most Egyptians would rarely taste. These are gifts reserved for the god, not because the statue will consume them in any physical way, but because they represent the highest of human provisions. Placing them before the god is an act of honouring with the very best the land can give. Jars of honey and small bowls of thick, fragrant oils are also set down. The honey gleams in the lamplight, a slow-moving gold that recalls the sun's own radiance. The oils carry the scent of lotus and myrrh, offerings that soothe and please the divine senses. Even the air changes with their presence, becoming warmer, richer, more intimate. Once all is arranged, the high priest stands before the altar. He recites a series of offering prayers, his voice low but firm, addressing the god as both ruler and guest. These words are old, older than the temple itself, preserved exactly so that each generation can speak to the divine in the same tongue as their ancestors. The prayers do not ask for favours. They affirm relationship. We feed you because you feed us. We give because you have given. When the final words fade, the sanctuary is filled with a quiet fullness. The offerings are not removed, not yet. For a time, they will remain before the god, absorbing the divine presence. It is only after this unseen communion that the priests will take them away, knowing they have been transformed from mere food into blessed remnants of a meal shared between heaven and earth. With the offerings in place, the next act is not of the hands, but of the voice. The sanctuary, heavy with incense and lamplight, waits in silence. Then, softly at first, a note rises, long, low, and steady. It is the high priest's voice, shaped by years of practice until it can hold a pitch like a line of gold drawn through still air. Other voices join him, weaving into a harmony that seems too large for the small chamber. The words they sing are older than the walls themselves, fragments of the original hymns said to have been taught by the gods. These are not songs for human ears alone. They are meant to cross boundaries. The Egyptians believed that sound was a bridge between worlds, that the right combinations of tone and word could call the divine into the space like a beacon. The hymns are sung not for beauty, but for precision. A single syllable misplaced could weaken the connection. Every vowel, every rhythm carries weight. The themes of the hymns are as constant as the river, They praise the god's might, recount the myths of creation, and remind the deity of their role as guardian of Ma'at, the balance that keeps chaos at bay. Some verses speak of the god's beauty, others of their justice, still others of their triumph over the forces of disorder. It is as much a reaffirmation as it is an invitation. The sound swells and spills beyond the sanctuary. It travels down the guarded pathways, curls into the painted halls, and brushes against the outer doors of the temple. Beyond those doors, the city sleeps, unaware that the fabric of cosmic order is being stitched together again by voices in the dark. The melody is slow, deliberate, and repetitive, like the turning of a great wheel. It is meant to carry the mind into a trance, a state where the priest's voice is no longer entirely his own, but shaped by the presence he calls. Some priests accompany the hymns with the soft rattle of a sistrum, its metallic sound shimmering through the air like sunlight on water. Others may strike small drums or clap rhythmically, grounding the chant with the heartbeat of the ritual. These sounds are not meant to overwhelm, but to blend, to keep the voices anchored in the steady pulse of sacred time. As the hymn unfolds, the god's image is bathed in the sound as much as in the smoke. The priests believe that the statue hears not with ears, but with the essence that dwells within it, absorbing each phrase as an offering in its own right. The air vibrates subtly, the stone and gold seeming to listen. When the final note is held, it is allowed to fade naturally into silence. The absence of sound is as important as the sound itself. It is the space in which the god might answer, not in words, but in a deepening of presence. The priests stand still, linen rustling faintly as they lower their hands. The hymn has done its work. The darkness, once empty, now feels inhabited, and in this presence, the next rite, the tending of the eternal flame, awaits. In the sanctuary's corner, away from the offerings and the god's statue, a small bronze lamp burns with a steady, unbroken flame. It is easy to overlook at first. Its light is modest compared to the warm glow of larger temple lamps. But for the priests, this is one of the most sacred objects in the room. This is the flame that must never go out. It is the breath of the temple, the constant heartbeat that ties night to day, ritual to ritual, generation to generation. The Egyptians believed that a flame, once lit in the god's presence, could hold the divine spark within it. As long as it burned, it carried the blessing of the deity, radiating unseen protection through the temple's walls. If the flame died, even for a moment, the chain of continuity would be broken, and the temple would have to undergo a complex purification before the gods could be approached again. No priest would willingly bear the shame of letting such a thing happen. Tending the flame is a quiet, careful duty. The oil, usually drawn from pressed castor or sesame seeds, is kept in sealed jars. A young priest approaches with one of these vessels, bowing slightly before touching the lamp. The wick, twisted from clean linen fibres, must be trimmed just enough to keep the flame steady, but not smoky. Each motion is deliberate, as though the smallest slip might disturb the delicate balance that allows the light to endure. The high priest watches closely, for this act is more than maintenance, it is renewal. Fresh oil is poured slowly into the lamp's shallow bowl, the surface of the liquid trembling as it accepts the gift. The flame bends toward the new fuel for a moment, then steadies again, brighter than before. In that instant, it is as if the lamp itself breathes in. Some priests whisper short invocations while tending the flame, calling upon the god to keep watch over the temple through the night. Others perform the act in silence, letting the fire speak for itself. The smoke is minimal, curling in thin silver threads toward the sanctuary's darkened ceiling. In the lamplight, the god's statue gleams more warmly, as though acknowledging the offering of light. This lamp is more than a symbol of presence. It is also a mark of vigilance. Just as the flame does not rest, neither do the priests. Through the long hours of night, one among them always remains near, ready to feed the wick or adjust the oil if needed. In this way, the god is never left alone in darkness, and the temple never falls into neglect. Outside the sanctuary, other lamps may flicker and fade as the hours pass, but this one will endure until morning, and then beyond. When dawn comes, it will not be extinguished. Instead, its light will be joined by the sun's two flames, one of heaven, one of earth, sharing the temple's space. And when the sun sets again, it will still be there, patient and watchful, a reminder that the god's gaze never closes, not even for a single heartbeat. The sanctuary, now brightened by the eternal lamp and fragrant with incense, shifts into a different kind of work. Feeding the god and tending the flame serve the bond between mortal and divine, but there is also the matter of protection. Darkness outside the temple is not empty, it is alive with forces both benign and hostile. The Egyptians believed that certain powers moved most freely under the stars, and that while the god's presence offered immense protection, it was the duty of the priests to weave additional safeguards. These took the form of shadow spells. The term does not imply evil. In the language of the temple, a shadow was simply an unseen space, and a spell was a bridge between the visible and invisible. Shadow spells were rituals designed to strengthen the temple's spiritual walls, to keep out what did not belong. They could only be performed at night, when the balance between light and darkness was most delicate. A low table is brought forward, its surface covered in small objects, amulets carved in the shapes of protective deities, figurines of falcons and jackals, bowls of water, and small squares of clean papyrus. Some of the amulets are ancient, handed down from priest to priest, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands. Others are made fresh for the night's rite, each carved with a specific purpose in mind. The high priest begins by tracing a circle on the floor around the table with a short staff tipped in copper. The circle is not just a boundary, it is a declaration of sacred space. Within it, no hostile force may pass. The other priests join him, speaking a litany that names the protective gods: Horus, the falcon-eyed; Anubis, guardian of the threshold; Sekhmet, whose roar scatters the unclean. The names roll through the air like drumbeats, each syllable anchoring the protection deeper. Next comes the inscription. Using reed pens dipped in soot-black ink, the priests write short spells on the papyrus squares. These are not long incantations, but concentrated phrases, distilled from centuries of tradition. The writing is careful, deliberate, every sign a charm in itself. Once written, the papyri are folded, tied with linen thread, and passed through the incense smoke to charge them. The figurines and amulets are also consecrated. A few drops of the sacred oils are brushed over them, while the priests whisper brief phrases meant to wake the protective force they embody. The falcon figurine is placed facing the temple's main gate, its gaze meant to pierce the night. The jackal is set by a side entrance, silent and watchful. Water in the bowls is stirred with a sprig of palm, the motion accompanied by blessings that make it a ward against intrusion. When all is arranged, the high priest raises his hands and speaks the final sealing formula. It is a simple phrase, but it carries the weight of every night it has been spoken before. Let no darkness cross this threshold unbidden. The circle is closed, the tools remain in place until dawn, and the temple rests under a mantle of protection woven from smoke, sound, and shadow. The circle of protection now holds firm, but there is another, subtler power the priests may call upon, one hidden not in objects or incense, but in the very fabric of speech. The Egyptians believed that every being, mortal or divine, carried two names, the one known to the world and the one known only to the self and to the gods. This second secret name was not merely a label, it was the essence of the being itself. To know it was to hold a key to its nature, its will, its power. For the gods, these secret names were guarded fiercely. Myths told of moments when they were wrested from the divine through cunning or devotion. The most famous tale speaks of Isis, who, desiring the supreme magic of the sun god Ra, fashioned a serpent from earth and his own spittle. When it bit him, he was overcome with pain and could not heal himself. She offered to cure him if he told her his true name. At last, he whispered it into her ear, and with it she gained a measure of his power. Such stories were not idle fables. They were reminders to the priests of the potency held in a name spoken at the right time. Within the temple, these names were not written in plain hieroglyphs or spoken openly. They were kept alive through careful, exact recitation during the most sacred hours. A high priest, schooled for years in the correct tones and inflections, might whisper the secret name of the god he served as part of the night rite. This was not for the benefit of other priests. It was for the god alone, a recognition that the priest knew the deity not only in public worship, but in intimate truth. The utterance of a secret name was never casual. Before speaking it, the priest would purify his mouth with water scented with mint or lotus, a symbolic cleansing of the vessel that would carry the sound. Then, facing the statue or the invisible presence it housed, he would lower his voice until it was almost breathless. The syllables, shaped slowly and with precision, would fall into the stillness of the sanctuary like drops into a pool. The belief was that by speaking the secret name, the priest called the god more fully into the moment, making the connection between divine and mortal as direct as it could be. It was an act of profound trust on both sides. The god allowed the mortal to speak the name. The mortal bore the responsibility of never misusing it. To speak a name wrongly, to call it without cause, was to invite imbalance, even punishment. Once the name was spoken, the priest would pause in silence, as if listening for an answer. Sometimes this pause lasted only a few breaths. Other times it stretched longer, the air heavy with a sense of presence. Only when the moment felt complete would the ritual continue. The name would not be spoken again until the next appointed night, kept safe in the folds of the priest's memory, guarded as closely as the temple's treasures. The sanctuary still holds the echo of the god's secret name when the priests turn to one of the night's most vivid duties, the defeat of Apophis, the serpent of chaos. In Egyptian belief, every night as the sun travelled through the underworld, Apophis rose from the depths to attack it, threatening to swallow its light forever. This was not a distant myth to be told to children. To the priests, it was a real and constant danger, renewed with each sunset. Without their intervention, the serpent might succeed, and dawn would never come. The ritual begins with preparation of the effigy. In a side chamber, away from the god's image, a small model of Apophis is crafted from wax, clay, or sometimes even a length of tightly coiled rope. Its form is unmistakable, long, sinuous, often with an open mouth and carved fangs. The material is chosen so it can be destroyed, for destruction is the point. The effigy is placed on a low table, surrounded by jars of ochre pigment, small knives, and reed pens. The high priest approaches first, reciting an invocation that calls the serpent by every known name, names not of reverence but of binding, meant to weaken its essence. Each name is a blow, a reminder of the serpent's eternal defeat. As he speaks, another priest paints red ochre across the effigy's body. Red is the colour of danger and of disorder, but in this moment it is used to mark the enemy, to make its form visible in the symbolic darkness. When the effigy is ready, the priests gather around it in a tight circle. Their voices rise together in a chant, rhythmic and relentless, designed to mirror the struggle of Ra's nightly voyage. The chant grows louder, faster, until the space seems to pulse with it. Then comes the first strike. The high priest pierces the serpent's head with a ritual knife, a single decisive movement. Another priest stabs its coils, another severs its tail. The wax or clay yields easily, but each cut is deliberate, meant to echo the blows struck by the gods themselves in the hidden realm. Once the effigy is pierced and cut, it is bound tightly with cord, as if to restrain it even in defeat. Some nights, the bound serpent is thrown into the brazier, its form collapsing into ash under the heat. Other nights, it is hacked apart and buried in a pit within the temple courtyard, ensuring it cannot rise again before dawn. This destruction is not a symbolic flourish, it is a renewal of the cosmic order. The priests believe that by acting out the serpent's defeat, they strengthen Ra's journey, making certain that the sun will emerge from the underworld victorious. The ashes or remains of the effigy carry no lingering threat. They are harmless, stripped of power by the ritual. When the act is complete, the priests return to the sanctuary. The god's image remains serene, the eternal flame steady. The great danger has been repelled for another night. Outside, the desert stars shine with indifferent clarity. but inside the temple there is the quiet satisfaction of a battle won, unseen by mortal eyes yet essential to every living thing awaiting the dawn. With the serpent of chaos dispatched, the atmosphere in the sanctuary shifts. The fierce energy of battle gives way to a quieter but no less significant offering, one that asks for divine favour without shedding a drop of blood. In the Egyptian temple, sacrifice was not always about killing animals. In fact, many nightly rites focused on what could be given symbolically, allowing the gods to receive the essence of the gift without the act of death. The concept is simple, yet profound. The life force of a thing can be transferred without ending that thing's life. The priests believe that by offering a symbolic version, an image, a representation, they present the spiritual essence of the sacrifice in its purest form. In this way, they honour the god while preserving the living world the god has created. The ritual begins with the preparation of substitute offerings. Small loaves of bread may be shaped like ducks or cattle. Wax models of fish or geese are moulded with careful detail, sometimes painted to make them vivid in the lamplight. These are placed on reed mats or small trays, as if they were the real animals. The key is intention. The gods, it is believed, see not with eyes, but with the truth of the heart. Grain, too, plays a role. Bowls of barley or emmer wheat are arranged in patterns, each heap representing the abundance of the fields. The high priest might take a pinch of grain and scatter it into the incense brazier. As it strikes the coals, it crackles and flares, releasing a scent both earthy and sweet. To the Egyptians, this is the aroma of the fields rising to meet the divine. Sometimes the bloodless sacrifice involves the careful pouring of liquids, milk from cows blessed for temple service, water drawn from a sacred lake, or beer brewed within the temple walls. The liquid is poured slowly into stone basins, the sound soft and deliberate, like a river being born in miniature. Each pour is accompanied by words that acknowledge the god as the source of fertility and abundance. The act is not without drama. In certain temples, a symbolic slaughter is performed on the wax or bread animals. A priest may touch them with a ritual blade, tracing the motions of sacrifice without cutting into living flesh. The gesture is enough. The gods understand the offering for what it is. By doing so, the priests affirm their willingness to give of their best while sparing the lives that sustain their communities. When the symbolic offerings are complete, they are left before the god alongside the night's earlier gifts of food and drink. The sanctuary becomes a place of layered generosity. Bread, beer, fruit, incense, and now these shapes of what might have been. To the uninitiated, it may look like a collection of simple objects. To the priests, it is a table set with the essence of life itself. The bloodless sacrifice is not a lesser act. It is a statement that the god's favour can be won through devotion, creativity, and intention, not just through the taking of life. In the stillness after the offering, the eternal flame burns steadily. The god's image glows in the lamplight, and the night's sacred work moves quietly toward its next phase. The temple's rituals may seem grand, even enviable, but the life of the priests who perform them is anything but free. Service to the gods is not a duty they step into at night and leave behind in the morning. It consumes every hour, every gesture, every breath of their existence. There is no true separation between the sacred and the personal, because the personal is all but erased. From the moment a man becomes a priest, his life is bound by restrictions that follow him like a second shadow. He cannot eat what he pleases, go where he wishes, or speak without considering the sanctity of his role. Every action is weighed against the need to remain ritually pure. The temple is not just his place of work, it is his world, and his world demands constant vigilance. There are no idle mornings, no lazy evenings at home. Priests often live within or beside the temple complex, their sleeping quarters plain and spare. Privacy is almost non-existent. Even the act of bathing, meant for purification, is rarely done alone. Others must be present to witness that the rules are followed, that the water comes from the correct source, that the sequence of cleansing is done in proper order. Conversations are measured, laughter is quiet. The topics one might speak about freely in the marketplace are avoided altogether. The tongue is as bound as the body, for a careless word can be seen as an impurity. Friendships outside the priesthood are rare, and when they occur, they are cautious, limited to exchanges that will not jeopardize the temple's reputation. Family life is complicated. Some priests are married, but their wives understand that temple service takes precedence over domestic concerns. Births, illnesses, even deaths within the family cannot interrupt the cycles of worship. A ritual missed is a duty abandoned, and such negligence is unthinkable. The god waits for no man's personal grief. Even the body itself is not fully one's own. Hair must be shaved regularly, nails trimmed short, skin kept free of blemish or dirt. The appearance of the priest is not about individuality, but about conformity to the temple's standard of purity. A change in personal grooming without the high priest's consent might be interpreted as arrogance, as if one sought to stand apart from the collective service. These restrictions are not punishment, they are part of the honor of serving. To the priests, discipline is the price of intimacy with the divine. In return, they hold a place of reverence in society. They speak the gods' names, enter the inner sanctuaries, and witness mysteries hidden from the rest of the world. But the cost is high, and there is no end to the payment. When outsiders see the white-clad figures moving through the temple at night, they might imagine the priests go home afterward to ordinary lives. The truth is that the temple is their home, their family, their constant companion. The gods demand all of them, and they have given all until there is no private life left to miss. If the priests' lives are bound in speech, movement, and companionship, they are no less bound at the table. What a priest may eat, how it is prepared, and when it may be consumed is dictated not by appetite, but by the demands of purity. In the eyes of the temple, food is never simply food. It is a channel through which the mortal world can either sustain or contaminate the body that serves the divine. The foundation of the priestly diet is plainness. Wheat and barley, lentils and beans, onions, leeks and cucumbers, the produce of the fertile Nile Valley, form the staples of daily meals. All must be fresh, harvested cleanly, and, whenever possible, grown in soil considered pure. Certain vegetables are washed in temple water before use, as if rinsing away the unseen traces of the outside world. Meat is a rare indulgence, reserved for festivals or special offerings. Even then, it must come from animals that have been raised under strict conditions, without blemish or illness, and slaughtered in a prescribed manner. Wild game is often forbidden outright. The unpredictable nature of its life in the marshes or desert makes it suspect in the temple's eyes. Fish, too, is often avoided, not because it is scarce, but because many species are tied in myth to the chaos god Seth, and to eat them would risk bringing his influence to the body. The preparation of food follows equally rigid rules. Bread baked for priests is often made from finely ground grain, with no sand or grit to dull the senses or mar the ritual of eating. No fat from unclean animals may be used in cooking, and the vessels that hold the food are kept separate from those used by others. A priest will not take food from an unfamiliar kitchen, nor drink from a stranger's jar. Even a moment's contact with unpurified hands could spoil the meal for ritual purposes. There are also restrictions on what foods may be combined. Certain offerings to the gods, milk, honey, certain fruits, are considered pure on their own but improper when mixed. These rules are not matters of taste, but of sacred order. A dish prepared wrongly might not only disqualify a priest from service that day, but require him to undergo additional purification before returning to the temple. Fasting plays its part as well. Before major rites, priests may abstain from all but water for a full day or more, believing that an empty stomach sharpens spiritual awareness. Some fast from certain foods, meat, sweet fruits, or rich breads, for the entire month of a festival. This self-denial is not punishment, but a way of clearing the body's inner space for the presence of the god. Meals, when taken, are simple and quiet affairs. There is no feasting, no drunkenness. The act of eating is mindful, almost another form of prayer, for the priests understand that every bite is part of their readiness to serve. To outsiders, these rules might seem severe, even joyless. To the priests, they are simply another expression of devotion. The food that sustains them is chosen not for pleasure, but for its ability to keep the body clean enough to stand in the shadow of the divine. Just as there are rules for what may enter the priests' mouths, there are rules for what and whom they may touch. In the sacred logic of the temple, contact is not a casual matter. Skin is a conduit. It can carry purity or impurity, blessing or defilement. A single unguarded touch could make a priest unfit to stand before the god until the proper rites of cleansing are completed. The most obvious restriction is against contact with the dead. Death, in Egyptian belief, was a liminal state, a passage that drew the soul into the afterlife but also placed the body in a condition of ritual danger. Priests serving in the temple could not attend funerals, prepare bodies, or even touch someone who had just died without breaking their state of purity. This restriction extended to mourning rituals. A priest could grieve, but he could not join in the physical gestures of mourning, tearing clothes, throwing dust on the head, embracing the bereaved, without consequence. Certain illnesses were also grounds for avoidance. A visible wound, skin disease, or unexplained rash was treated not only as a health concern, but as a possible mark of spiritual imbalance. Contact with such conditions risked transmitting that imbalance. Even if no illness followed, the priest would have to undergo purification before returning to sacred duties. The rules did not stop at the sick or the dead. There were also limitations on contact with people outside the priesthood, especially strangers. In crowded marketplaces, a priest might wrap his linen robe tighter, avoiding jostling shoulders. Public gatherings were navigated carefully, if not avoided altogether. An accidental brush from someone ritually unclean, someone who had just given birth, handled the dead, or engaged in certain kinds of work, could undo days of preparation for temple service. Even within the priesthood, touch was deliberate. When a senior priest placed his hand on the shoulder of a junior, it was an act of recognition or blessing, not mere familiarity. Ritual tasks that required passing sacred objects were done with precision. The hands were kept clean, the grip steady. Any carelessness in handling the god's property was an offense in itself. The most personal restrictions were those involving intimacy. Sexual contact, even within marriage, was strictly forbidden during periods of temple service. The body had to remain entirely focused on its sacred role, free from the mingling of passions that belonged to the private sphere. Priests in active rotation might live apart from their families during service periods to ensure the boundaries were kept without strain. This constant vigilance made physical life a careful dance. Hands that might long to comfort a grieving friend, arms that might wish to embrace a loved one, were kept still. Every gesture was measured against the weight of the priest's calling. The absence of casual touch became second nature, a quiet barrier between the sacred life and the everyday world. To the outside observer, these rules might seem harsh, even isolating. To the priest, they were simply the cost of proximity to the divine. The god's presence was worth more than any fleeting contact, and so the hands remained clean, the body untouched, until the night's duties were complete. Years of service in the temple leave their mark on the body and the mind. The outward dignity of a priest, the clean linen, the calm voice, the precise gestures, hides a life of relentless discipline. Every rule observed, every sacrifice made, every moment of restraint comes at a cost. Spiritual power is not given freely. It is purchased daily in a currency of endurance. The first price is physical. The repeated shaving of the head and body leaves the skin raw, exposed to sun, wind, and the fine grit of the desert air. Bathing multiple times a day in cold water during winter nights chills the bones. Bare feet on stone floors for hours at a time bring aches that linger long after the ritual's end. The constant standing, bowing, and slow walking through long corridors take their toll on knees and back. Even the sacred posture, head slightly inclined, hands positioned in a gesture of offering, becomes a strain when held for extended periods. There is also the quiet erosion of stamina. Priests serve during the hours when the rest of the city sleeps. The body's natural rhythms are ignored. Sleep comes in brief, irregular intervals that never fully refresh. The mind must remain alert despite fatigue, because a single mistake in the sanctuary a missed word, an inverted gesture, can ruin a rite. The discipline to keep every movement exact under exhaustion is as much a test as the rituals themselves. Emotionally, the burden is heavier still. The constant restrictions on speech, diet, touch, and movement form an invisible wall between the priest and ordinary life. Family gatherings happen without him, friends grow distant, and the small joys of daily living, sharing a meal in the marketplace, laughing freely at a story, fade into memory. To serve the god is to belong, but also to be apart. Loneliness can creep in like the desert wind, silent, persistent, wearing down the spirit. The mental demands are unyielding. The priest must remember vast sequences of prayers, chants, and ritual instructions, many of them in archaic forms of the language. Each is tied to specific times, gestures, and offerings. There is no space for improvisation. The mind must carry the weight of tradition without error, year after year. The constant awareness of the god's presence, of being observed not just by fellow priests, but by the divine itself, creates a pressure few can fully understand. And yet, in the midst of these burdens, there is also a kind of deep, quiet pride. The priest knows that he stands where few are allowed, that he has spoken the god's name, touched the god's image, kept the eternal flame alive. The sacrifices have made him what he is, a bridge between the human and the divine. The weariness in his limbs, the solitude in his life, are proof that he has paid the price willingly. The years will eventually claim his strength, as they claim all men. When that time comes, he will leave the temple with the same humility with which he entered. But until that day, he carries the weight of his calling without complaint. For in the temple's stillness, in the flicker of its eternal lamps, he finds the truth that makes every sacrifice bearable. The god is here, and he is worthy of the cost. Between the major rites of the night, there are long stretches when the temple grows still. No chant rises, no offering is laid upon the altar, no procession moves through the corridors. These are the silent hours when the priests wait, not idly, but with a kind of poised watchfulness. The work of guarding the god's presence does not end when the last prayer is spoken. It simply changes shape. The sanctuary is never empty. At least one priest remains within, tending the eternal lamp, watching over the offerings, and ensuring that the air remains fragrant with incense. The flame's soft glow becomes the heart of the chamber, a steady pulse in the surrounding darkness. Outside the sanctuary, other priests walk the perimeter of the temple, their footsteps muffled by sand carried in from the courtyard. Each one knows the boundaries of his patrol, as well as he knows the prayers he speaks at dawn. The soundscape of the silent hours is unlike anything in the waking city. In the open courtyard, the wind moves through palm fronds with a faint rustle, mingled with the soft trickle of water from a purification basin. Occasionally a nightbird calls from the temple roof, its cry echoing briefly before fading into the vast sky. Inside, the stone breathes cold air, and the smallest sound, a shifting robe, the creak of a wooden door, seems amplified. Some priests use this time for personal devotion. Seated cross-legged in the dim light, they recite hymns from memory or meditate on the myths of the god they serve. Others quietly prepare for the next rite, checking that the offerings are in order, the ritual vessels clean, the paths through the temple unobstructed. This is also the time when amulets are inspected, fresh incense prepared, and papyrus scrolls containing sacred texts set in their proper places. The silence is purposeful. It allows the priests to attune themselves to the rhythms of the night and the subtle signs of the god's presence. A shift in the air, a change in the way the flame bends, even a dreamlike impression in the mind. These are noticed, pondered, and sometimes recorded. In the temple's way of thinking, the divine does not always speak in words. Often it is in these quiet intervals that the god is most near. Outside the temple walls, the city sleeps. Fires in household hearths have burned down to embers. The marketplace lies deserted, and the Nile flows silently under the moon. But here within the temple, the night is alive. It is a living thread, stretched between dusk and dawn, and the priests are its keepers. The silent hours are as much a part of the ritual as the great chants and offerings, for without them, the temple would be all motion and no listening. When the next appointed time approaches, the stillness begins to stir. A soft chime of metal signals the gathering of the priests. Robes are adjusted, lamps refilled, and incense prepared. The silence has done its work. The temple is ready to speak again. And so the night's rhythm moves forward, carrying the priests into the next act of their long vigil. In the long stillness between rites, some priests turn to a more mysterious form of service, seeking messages from the gods through dreams. This practice, known to the Egyptians as temple sleep, is not idle rest. It is a deliberate descent into the inner world, an opening of the mind to visions that might carry the gods' guidance, warnings, or blessings. The preparation begins hours before lying down. The priest who will dream read undergoes the same purifications as for ritual service, bathing, shaving, and dressing in fresh linen. But there is an added quietness to his manner, a slowing of the pace, as though he is already stepping out of the waking world. Food is avoided, especially heavy or spiced dishes, for the stomach must not weigh down the mind. A light infusion of herbs, lotus or blue water lily, may be sipped to encourage calm and focus. The chosen place for sleeping is never an ordinary bed. In some temples, a small chamber adjoining the sanctuary is kept for this purpose. In others, the priest sleeps on a reed mat directly in the forecourt of the god's image, close enough to feel the warmth of the eternal flame. The mat is sprinkled with petals or perfumed with a trace of Kefi incense, creating a sensory bridge between the sacred space and the inner landscape he hopes to enter. Before lying down, the priest prays aloud, asking the god to speak through dream. The words are formal, often invoking the god's many titles and powers, but beneath them is a personal plea. Show me what I must know. Then he closes his eyes and lets the darkness take him. The dreams that follow are not always clear stories. Sometimes they are flashes of images, a falcon flying against the sun, a lotus opening in slow motion, a river flowing backward. Other times they take the shape of myth, the priest finding himself in the presence of the god, hearing words in a voice that seems to echo from both within and without. The Egyptians believed that such visions were not fantasies of the mind, but direct communications from the divine realm, shaped into symbols the human soul could receive. Upon waking, whether in the deep of night or with the first faint light of dawn, the priest does not move immediately. He lies still, holding the dream in memory, tracing its edges before it fades. Then, sitting upright, he speaks it aloud to a fellow priest trained in interpretation. This partner listens closely, asking questions, noting details. The images are weighed against the myths, the gods' known attributes, and the circumstances of the temple's current service. The resulting interpretation might guide the temple's next actions. A vision of clear water could signal a season of abundance. A serpent might warn of a coming threat. Sometimes the dream offers counsel for an individual priest, other times for the temple as a whole. These dream readings are recorded on papyrus, stored alongside ritual records and offerings, becoming part of the temple's living memory. They are reminders that the gods speak not only in the grand pageantry of rites, but also in the quiet theatre of the mind. For the priest who dreams in the temple, sleep itself becomes an act of devotion, and waking is simply the moment when the message must be brought back into the world. Beyond their duties to the living gods, the priests also serve those who have already crossed into the afterlife. These are not the chaotic dead, restless and wandering, but the honoured spirits, pharaohs, noble patrons and past priests, whose tombs and memorial chapels remain under the temple's care. The Egyptians believed that such souls still required nourishment and attention, for the afterlife was not a place of endless self-sufficiency. The dead continued to rely on the living, and it was the priest's responsibility to ensure they were not forgotten. In the quiet hours of the night, while the sanctuary rests between rites, a small group of priests prepares offerings for the ancestors. The items mirror those given to the gods: bread, beer, onions, fruit, and small cuts of meat. They are arranged on trays of polished wood or reed mats, each set accompanied by a small jar of cool water drawn fresh from the temple's sacred basin. The arrangement is deliberate, for the offerings must reflect abundance without waste, enough to honour the dead without tempting envy from those still living. The procession to the offering place is silent, except for the soft shuffle of bare feet on stone. If the memorial shrines are within the temple complex, the priests move through narrow halls lined with carved names and titles of the departed. In some temples, the dead are honoured in separate chapels near the outer court. In others, niches in the walls hold small statues of those whose memory is kept alive. Wherever the shrine may be, the approach is slow, respectful, as though the spirits themselves are waiting at the threshold. Once before the shrine, the high priest begins the perkeru, the voice-offering prayer. This invocation is not a request, but a declaration. Bread, beer, cattle, fowl, alabaster, and every good thing for the spirit of, followed by the name of the deceased. The Egyptians believed that speaking the name was the most important act, for as long as a name was spoken, the soul continued to exist in the next world. The offerings are set down in front of the statue or stela. A small libation of water is poured onto the ground, sometimes mixed with a trace of wine or milk. This gesture, simple but essential, is meant to refresh the ka, the vital essence of the departed. Incense is lit, its smoke curling upward as if carrying the gifts to the unseen realm. The priests remain for a time, standing quietly while the offerings belong to the dead. Some may close their eyes, reciting private prayers for those whose faces they have never seen, but whose names they have spoken countless times. Others watch the flicker of the lamp flames, imagining the moment when the spirits draw near to claim their gifts. When the period of offering is complete, the food is not wasted. It is returned to the living, often to the lower temple staff, its spiritual essence believed to have been taken by the dead. In this way, the cycle continues. The living sustain the dead bless the living, and the temple remains the bridge between the two. Night after night, year after year, this quiet service reaffirms a truth the Egyptians held above all: that death is not an end, only a change of address, and the bonds between the living and the departed must be kept as carefully as the bonds between mortals and gods. For the priests who keep watch through the night, the moon is more than a companion in the sky. It is a silent witness to their work, a silver lamp hanging above the temple roof. Its light spills into the courtyards, glimmers along the edges of columns, and softens the dark. But on certain nights, the moon vanishes. Sometimes it is the natural absence of the new moon. Other times it is more unsettling, a lunar eclipse, when the familiar white disk turns shadowed or red. These are the nights when the temple takes on a different air, for the Egyptians believed that such darkness was not empty, but alive with omens. When the moon hides its face, the balance of night feels altered. The absence of its glow deepens the shadows in the temple's corridors, making each corner seem farther away, each chamber more enclosed. The air feels thicker, as if the world itself is holding its breath. In these moments, the priests see not just the loss of light, but the possibility of disorder slipping into the world. Rituals for these nights are more protective than celebratory. At the first sign of the moon's retreat, the temple bells may be struck, deep resonant tones rolling into the sky to signal that special rites are beginning. The eternal flame in the sanctuary is fed with fresh oil, its glow kept strong to stand in defiance of the darkened heavens. More incense is burned than usual, the smoke rising like a barrier between the sacred space and whatever unseen forces might seek entry. In the open courtyard, some priests position themselves so they can see the sky directly. If the moon is in eclipse, they watch in silence, acknowledging the celestial drama without fear but with solemn respect. Myth tells of Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, trying not only to swallow the sun but also to consume the moon. The priests answer this threat as they do in the sun's nightly journey. They name the serpent, curse it, and symbolically strike it down in words and gestures. Inside the sanctuary, the rites grow more intense. Protective spells are recited in longer sequences, each god invoked in turn to stand guard over the temple and the land. The gods associated with light, Thoth, Khonsu, Ra, are called upon most fervently. Some priests inscribe temporary protective charms on strips of linen, which are placed at the thresholds of the inner chambers until the moon's light returns. If the darkness is caused by the new moon rather than an eclipse, the mood is less defensive but still attentive. These are nights of beginnings, when the moon's rebirth is anticipated. The priests might offer fresh water, milk, or honey to encourage the moon's return to fullness, symbolic acts of feeding and nurturing the celestial cycle. When the moon finally reappears, whether hours later or with the next phase, the priests mark the moment with quiet gratitude. Lamps are adjusted so their flames seem to greet the returning light. The air in the temple feels lighter, as though a long-held breath has been released. The moon's face has returned, and with it, a reassurance. Order still holds, the cycles remain unbroken, and the temple's long night watch continues. As the night wanes and the first pale hints of dawn begin to soften the eastern sky, the temple shifts into its closing rhythm. The god, who has been awake and honoured through the long hours, must now be returned to rest. This is not simply ending a ritual, it is completing a cycle. The priests understand that as the world turns toward day, the god withdraws from active communion with mortals, retreating into the hidden spaces from which divine energy flows. To put the god to bed is to honour that withdrawal with care and precision. The process begins in silence. The high priest approaches the sanctuary, flanked by attendants carrying folded linen and small vessels of oil. The god's statue still gleams in lamplight, clothed in the fresh garments given during the night's rites. Before any change is made, the high priest offers a final bow, acknowledging the god's presence one last time before the day takes hold. The clothing of the god is removed gently, fold by fold. Each piece is lifted away with both hands, never allowed to touch the floor. These garments are not discarded. They are taken to a special chamber where they will be purified for future use or ceremonially retired. As the god is unrobed, the high priest murmurs words of gratitude for the god's presence through the night. Once the statue is bare, it is anointed lightly with fragrant oil, sealing in the blessings of the night. The oil's sheen catches the lamplight, making the god's form seem to glow. This anointing is not for cleansing, but for comfort, a final act of devotion before rest. In some temples, a small amount of incense is waved around the statue at this stage, as if to lull the god into a peaceful slumber. Fresh linen is then brought forward, not the ceremonial robes of the night, but simpler coverings meant for repose. These are draped carefully over the statue, veiling it completely. The veil serves both as a sign of privacy and as a symbolic door between the divine and mortal realms. Once covered, the god is considered no longer in direct communion with the temple until the next awakening. The high priest then steps back, signaling the attendants to tend to the offerings. Any remaining food is respectfully removed, its essence believed to have been accepted by the god. The sacred vessels are cleaned and set aside for the next service. The eternal flame is trimmed but never extinguished. It will keep vigil even while the god rests. Finally, the sanctuary doors are closed. The heavy wooden panels meet with a deep, resonant sound, and the bronze fittings are secured. Outside the sanctuary, the priests bow once more towards the sealed chamber. The god is at rest, the night's service complete. This quiet conclusion holds its own weight. There is no applause, no fanfare, only the deep satisfaction of having upheld the bond between god and temple for another night. As sunlight begins to spill into the courtyards, the priests disperse, knowing that when darkness falls again, the cycle will begin anew, and they will once more awaken the god from sleep. With the god now veiled and the sanctuary at rest, the priests turn to the final physical safeguard of the inner temple, sealing its doors. This act is more than simple closure. It is the locking away of the sacred, the drawing of a boundary between the divine realm within and the mortal world without. To cross that threshold now without cause would not merely be a breach of security, it would be a violation of cosmic order. The sanctuary's great doors, heavy cedar bound with bronze, are drawn together with deliberate slowness. Each panel moves with a deep groaning sound that resonates in the chamber, as though the temple itself feels the shift. The high priest stands directly before them, hands raised in a gesture of command, reciting the formal words of sealing. These are not mere instructions, they are a verbal barrier, a spoken lock. Once the doors meet, assistants bring forward thick cords braided from flax and dyed a deep red. The cords are passed through heavy bronze rings fixed to the door panels, then drawn tight and knotted in a pattern that has been unchanged for centuries. The red dye is no accident. It is the colour of protection, believed to repel hostile forces and mark the boundary as untouchable. Over the knot, a clay seal is pressed, bearing the impression of the temple's sacred emblem. This emblem might be the image of the god's animal form, the symbol of the sun disk, or another mark known only to the temple's servants. The seal is not for mere identification. It is a magical safeguard. Once impressed, it becomes part of the barrier itself, a silent guardian that will shatter if the cord is broken. The sealing is accompanied by a final recitation, a chant invoking the gods of thresholds, Anubis, guardian of gates, Thoth, keeper of divine words, and sometimes Horus, whose watchful eye is thought to guard all sacred spaces. Each name is spoken slowly, each syllable placed as one might place a stone in a wall. The chant affirms that the god rests within, that no mortal may enter until the proper rites summon the deity again. The sanctuary is not the only door to be sealed. Smaller chambers within the inner temple, storerooms for sacred vessels, and alcoves holding ritual texts are all secured in similar fashion. Each door is closed with the same deliberate ceremony, though without the grandeur reserved for the sanctuary itself. These lesser sealings still carry weight. A vessel or text removed without ritual consent is as dangerous an affront as entering the god's chamber unbidden. When the last seal is pressed and the final knot tied, the high priest walks the perimeter of the inner temple one last time. His eyes trace each doorway, each seal, as if memorizing their placement. This inspection is not about mistrust of his fellow priests. It is about ensuring the divine order is intact before the temple opens to the light of day. Only when he is satisfied does he give the signal to withdraw. The inner temple is now closed, guarded not only by locks and seals, but by the authority of the gods themselves. The mortal world may pass by its outer walls freely, but what lies within is beyond reach until the night comes again, and the sanctuary is opened to the presence of the divine. With the sanctuary sealed and the gods safely at rest, there remains one last act before the priests may step away from the night's service, the final hymn. This is not the thunderous chant of awakening, nor the fierce invocation used in the battles against chaos. It is a softer song, a farewell offered to the god and to the night itself. It marks the passing of sacred time into the ordinary light of day. The high priest leads the procession into the temple's central court, where the first faint traces of dawn begin to colour the horizon. The air is still cool, carrying the last breath of the night wind. The eternal lamp, carried from the sanctuary, is placed at the heart of the court so that its light mingles with the growing brightness in the east. Around it, the priests form a half-circle, each facing the horizon where Ra's return is expected. The hymn begins with a single voice, low and steady, tracing the opening lines of a song that has been sung for countless generations. It speaks of the night's safe passage, of the god's protection over the temple and the land, and of the faithful service given in darkness. The words are old, but their meaning is fresh in the minds of those who sing them. They have lived each line over the past hours. Gradually, the other voices join, layering harmony over the melody. The chant swells, but never grows hurried. Its rhythm follows the slow turn of the earth toward the sun, each phrase unfolding like the sky's own light. The priests sing of the god's journey through the underworld, of the triumph over Apophis, of the moment when the solar bark will rise again into the day. The sound is not for mortal ears alone. It is meant to carry beyond stone walls and across the invisible boundary between worlds. In some temples, the hymn includes the beating of small frame drums or the soft rattle of the sistrum, the music trembling like the first stirrings of the morning. In others, the voices are left unaccompanied, rising pure and unadorned into the dawn air. Whatever the form, the hymn is unbroken. Once begun, it flows without pause until the final line. As the last verses are sung, the eastern sky brightens. The first ray of sunlight touches the uppermost stones of the temple walls, gilding them in soft gold. The priests face it fully now, voices lifting in the hymn's closing invocation, a blessing for the god, for the temple, for the people beyond its gates. When the final note fades, it is allowed to dissolve into silence. The priests bow their heads, each absorbing the stillness before turning to the duties of the day. The eternal lamp is carried back inside, placed in its appointed place to burn until night falls once more. The offerings from the night are distributed, the sacred tools cleaned and stored, the incense braziers emptied. The hymn lingers in the air even as the temple settles into daylight. It is a quiet reminder that while the world beyond its walls may have slept, here the bond between God and mortal was tended without fail. The night service is complete, sealed with song, and the temple stands ready for another turn of the sun. The hymn fades, and with it, the last breath of the night's work. Now the temple turns to meet the day. The first rays of the sun spilling over the horizon are not simply light. They are the visible victory of order over chaos, proof that the god has triumphed once again in the underworld. But this light is also a cleansing force, and the priests know it must be welcomed carefully. Before the daily cycle begins, the lingering power of the night must be dispersed. This is the purge of the first light. The process begins at the temple's main gate, where the high priest stands facing east. The horizon glows with a thin line of gold, and the air is cool, carrying the faint scent of dust and early flowers. A small brazier of incense smoulders at his side, its smoke curling lazily upward. He raises his hands toward the light, not in greeting but in acknowledgement, a silent recognition that the sun's return is the work of the god they have served all night. The gates are opened slowly, allowing the first beam of sunlight to enter the temple's outer court. It cuts a straight path across the paving stones, stretching like a golden spear toward the sanctuary doors. This light is believed to sweep away the residue of night's energies, dissolving any lingering shadows that might cling to the temple. As it passes, priests move in rhythm with it, sweeping the ground with fresh palm fronds, scattering grains of purified natron salt in its path. In the inner courts, braziers are refreshed with new incense, frankincense for purity, myrrh for sanctity. The smoke mingles with the sunlight streaming in through high windows and open doorways. Priests move from chamber to chamber, carrying small bowls of water drawn from the temple's sacred pool. They sprinkle the water lightly on floors, walls, and thresholds, speaking brief blessings as they go. The cool droplets catch in the sunlight, flashing momentarily like fragments of gold before disappearing. Even the eternal flame receives its share of attention. A few drops of fresh oil are added, the wick trimmed to burn clean and bright. In some temples, a shard of sunlight is deliberately reflected into the flame using a polished copper mirror, symbolically joining the power of day with the steady watch of night. The god's sanctuary remains sealed during this process. The purge is not for the god, but for the space that surrounds and protects the divine presence. By the time the sunlight has reached its full strength in the outer courts, the temple has been swept, sprinkled, perfumed, and renewed. Every corner now carries the scent of incense and the freshness of morning air. The priests conclude the purge with a short recitation, praising the sun's triumph, affirming the god's eternal protection, and blessing the temple for the work of the coming day. When the final words are spoken, the night's presence is fully gone, replaced by the clarity of morning. The temple stands in perfect balance once again, its stones warm beneath the growing sun, ready to open its doors to the people who will soon arrive seeking blessings, offerings, and the reassurance that the divine order holds strong. For all that is carved into temple walls and preserved on papyrus scrolls, The deepest knowledge of the priesthood never appears in ink or stone. These are the priestly secrets, ritual details, invocations and understandings of the divine, passed only from mouth to ear, from elder to apprentice, in quiet corners, away from the echo of the public halls. They are guarded not merely out of pride or exclusivity, but because to share them carelessly is to risk breaking the sacred order they uphold. Such secrets often concern the subtleties of ritual, the exact pitch at which a god's name should be sung, the moment in a chant when the voice must rise like a hawk's cry or fall into a whisper. These tonal shifts may seem minor to an outsider, but to the priests they are the levers that move unseen forces. The wrong tone at the wrong time is believed to weaken the right, perhaps even invite disorder rather than harmony. Other secrets lie in the precise sequence of gestures. The formal inscriptions may show a priest raising a hand or holding an offering, but they do not reveal the almost imperceptible movements in the fingers, the subtle changes in grip, or the pacing of the breath that must accompany them. These details are taught in person, demonstrated again and again until the apprentice moves with the same quiet certainty as his master. Some knowledge is held back because it concerns the vulnerabilities of the divine image itself. A senior priest might quietly explain how to recognize when a god's statue is no longer receiving the presence it once did, or how to renew its vitality without disturbing its dignity. Such matters are never discussed in open courts, for they are too intimate to be exposed to the gaze of the uninitiated. The most closely guarded of all are the alternate forms of the god's secret names. While a single hidden name may be invoked during a public rite, the full litany of variations, each with its own resonance and purpose, is taught to only a handful of priests in a generation. These names are never spoken together except in the most dire need, for they are believed to summon the god with a force too great for ordinary occasions. It is not only technical skill that is kept in this oral tradition, but also the stories behind it. Elders recount visions seen in dream reading, unrecorded miracles witnessed during rites, and the ways the gods have tested the devotion of their servants. These tales carry lessons that no formal instruction can match, shaping the instincts and judgment of those who hear them. Apprentices are reminded often, a secret once spoken cannot be unspoken. To betray one is to place both oneself and the temple in peril. Some priests choose to take certain knowledge with them to the grave rather than risk it falling into careless hands. The burden is heavy, but it is also a mark of trust, proof that the god's service has found them worthy of carrying mysteries too delicate for the public eye. Thus, the temple's greatest treasures are not the golden vessels locked in storerooms or the towering reliefs on its walls. They are the words and gestures that live only in memory and voice, fragile yet enduring, passed along a chain of guardians who know that their charge is not to own the mystery, but to keep it alive for those who will one day stand in their place. The rules of the priesthood were not simply guidelines, they were the scaffolding that held the sacred order in place. Every ritual, every purification, every word spoken in the sanctuary was built on the assumption that those serving the gods upheld these rules without fail. But priests were still human, and humans falter. When a priest broke the rules, the consequences rippled far beyond his own life, touching the temple, the god's favour, and the confidence of the people. Some transgressions were born of carelessness. A priest who entered the sanctuary without proper purification might think it harmless, but to the temple it was a breach that could undo days of preparation. A missed bath, a skipped shaving, or even consuming forbidden food before service could render a man ritually unclean. If discovered, he was immediately removed from the rotation, subjected to extended purification, and sometimes forbidden from participating in certain rites for weeks. Other breaches were deliberate and more dangerous. Speaking the god's secret name outside its proper ritual was one of the gravest offences. It was believed that such misuse could weaken the god's presence in the temple or draw unwanted spiritual forces into the sacred space. Priests who committed this act faced swift expulsion from the order, and in some cases, formal curses spoken over them to sever their bond with the temple. Theft from the temple, even of something small, was unthinkable yet not unheard of. Sacred oils, incense, or food offerings were tempting in times of personal need. But taking them for oneself was not only theft, it was a form of sacrilege. The stolen item had been dedicated to the god, and removing it from that bond was seen as a direct insult to the divine. The penalty could be exile from the priesthood and public disgrace. There were also moral transgressions tied to the priest's vow of purity. Engaging in forbidden intimacy during periods of active service was not merely a private matter, it was believed to pollute the body, making it unfit to approach the god. The temple's response was severe: ritual cleansing, suspension from duties, and a formal declaration that the priest had defiled his office. In the most serious cases, he could be barred from ever serving again. The breaking of rules did not go unnoticed by the gods, or so the temple believed. Misfortunes following such acts were often read as signs of divine displeasure. A failed harvest, a sudden illness among the livestock, even an unexplained temple accident. Whether coincidence or not, these events reinforced the belief that the priesthood's discipline was essential for the well-being of the entire community. Reinstatement after a major breach was rare and only possible after extensive penance. This could involve weeks of fasting, multiple daily purifications, and special offerings made at the priest's own expense. Even then, trust was slow to return. The other priests might keep a quiet distance, and the offender's role in the most sacred rites could remain limited for years. In the end, the lesson was clear. The rules existed not to bind a man's freedom, but to bind him to the god he served. Breaking them risked far more than personal disgrace. It risked the very thread of order that the temple wove into the world night after night. The rites of the night were not only acts of devotion, they were also instruments of influence. In ancient Egypt, the temple was more than a house of worship. It was a seat of authority, wealth, and quiet persuasion. And the magic worked in darkness, beyond the eyes of the common people, carried a special weight. The pharaoh might rule the land, but the priests, through their mastery of these hidden rites, could shape the flow of power itself. Night magic was the temple's invisible voice in the affairs of the state. By controlling the sacred rituals that renewed the cosmic order, the priesthood positioned itself as the guardian of the kingdom's stability. Pharaohs relied on their rites to ensure the sun's safe rising, the Nile's timely flood, and the gods' continued favour. Without the priests' cooperation, these symbolic guarantees would falter, and with them, the divine legitimacy of the ruler's reign. The connection between temple and throne was sealed in mutual dependence. Pharaoh appointed high priests and sanctioned their authority, while the priests performed nightly ceremonies to strengthen his divine right to rule. In private, certain prayers named the pharaoh directly, binding his life and reign into the fabric of the god's protection. This was not mere pageantry, it was a political contract written in incense smoke and sacred words. But influence was not limited to loyalty. Priests held knowledge that could sway royal decisions, omens seen in dream reading, signs observed in the flame of the eternal lamp, or symbols found during the battle against Apophis. Such interpretations could be delivered to the palace as divine guidance, often shaping policy, war strategy, or diplomatic moves. A favourable reading might embolden a military campaign. A warning could halt one before it began. Control over magical knowledge also gave the priesthood leverage in moments of political uncertainty. In times when succession was in dispute, the high priests could publicly affirm or quietly undermine a claimant's right to the throne by framing divine will in their rituals. Even a subtle omission in a hymn, failing to speak the pharaoh's name in a key place, was understood as a powerful signal to those who listened closely. The temple's wealth reinforced this influence. Night magic required offerings of food, drink, incense, and costly oils, much of it provided by royal decree or private endowments from wealthy families. These resources passed through the temple's hands, funding its own operations and ensuring the loyalty of its servants. A priesthood with full storerooms and well-fed staff could maintain its rights indefinitely, and in doing so, maintain its position in the political hierarchy. It was an influence exercised quietly, without armies or open decrees. The temple did not need to issue laws, it shaped the beliefs that gave laws their force. The night rituals were the unseen threads woven into the fabric of statecraft, ensuring that divine order and political order moved together. To the common people, the priests were keepers of the sacred flame. To the pharaoh, they were allies and guardians of his divine image. But beneath that role lay an unspoken truth. Whoever held the power to shape the god's favour at night also held the power to guide the destiny of Egypt itself. The sacred nights of the Egyptian temple were not sealed entirely against the outside world. Egypt was a crossroads of ancient trade and conquest, its deserts crossed by caravans from the east and south, its harbours open to ships from distant shores. With these travellers came not only goods but gods, foreign deities whose images, stories and rituals sometimes found their way into the quiet heart of Egypt's own religious life. And in the still hours before dawn, when the most secret rites unfolded, these outsiders could be given a place alongside the native pantheon. The priests approached foreign gods cautiously. They were not invited into the sanctuary without purpose. Often their inclusion was born of political alliance. A pharaoh marrying a foreign princess might instruct the priesthood to honour her homeland's chief deity as a gesture of unity, or a valuable trading partner might be courted through the formal recognition of their god within Egyptian temples. The high priests understood the political advantage. Welcoming a foreign god was a subtle way of binding foreign lands to Egypt's cosmic order. Some foreign deities blended easily with the Egyptian pantheon, their roles overlapping with local gods. The Syrian goddess Astarte, associated with war and fertility, could be honoured in a night hymn without disturbing the supremacy of Hathor or Sekhmet. The Nubian lion god Dedon, a figure of wealth and incense, might receive offerings alongside Amun during rituals that sought prosperity. In such cases, the priests used a method called syncretism, fusing the identities of deities so that the foreign god became a form or face of an Egyptian one. These blended rites were performed quietly, often in the less public portions of the temple. In the deep hours of night, a statue of the foreign god might be placed in a side chapel, veiled and treated with the same ceremonial care as the native images. Incense particular to the god's homeland could be burned, resins brought from far-off coasts, or spices unfamiliar to the Nile Valley. Offerings might include imported fruits, breads flavoured with foreign grains, or precious oils poured from jars with painted foreign scripts. There were times when foreign gods were honoured without blending, kept distinctly themselves. These moments carried a sense of diplomatic courtesy, an acknowledgement that divine power was not limited to Egypt alone. Yet even here, the Egyptian framework prevailed. The foreign god was welcomed into Egypt's sacred order, offered a role in supporting Maat, the balance of the cosmos. For the priests, this inclusion was not a threat, but an expansion of their influence. To serve a god from distant lands was to symbolically extend Egypt's spiritual authority beyond its borders. A hymn sung in the temple at midnight might be meant for the ears of a deity whose shrine stood hundreds of miles away, but in the act of singing, that god was brought within Egypt's protective circle. By the time dawn approached, the foreign god's image would be veiled again, its offerings cleared, its presence folded quietly into the temple's memory. The public might never know the specifics of what had transpired in the night, but those who served at the altar understood. Egypt's gods were not jealous jailers. They were keepers of a cosmic order spacious enough to hold the voices of many lands, as long as those voices joined in the great harmony that upheld the world. There came a time when the rhythm of the temple nights began to falter. The Egypt that had upheld these rites for millennia was changing. Foreign rule, shifting political powers, and the arrival of new religions brought currents that even the thick stone walls of the temples could not keep out. The gods who had been awakened each night for countless generations were finding fewer voices to call their names. And so, though no one marked the date on a scroll, there was a last night in the old temples. On that night, the priests carried on as they had always done. They bathed in the sacred pools, shaved their heads, donned fresh linen, and lit the eternal lamps. Incense smoke curled upward as offerings were laid before the god. Chants rose in the dark, echoing under painted ceilings, just as they had for centuries. But outside the sanctuary, the world no longer revolved around these rituals. Many of the city's people now prayed to other gods, spoke in other tongues, or found their spiritual life elsewhere. The temple's place at the center of the kingdom's heartbeat was fading. Some priests knew the change was irreversible. Others clung to the belief that the god's will would turn the tide. But all could feel the air in the sanctuary was different, thinner somehow, as though the presence that had once been so vivid was slipping just beyond reach. The god was still honored, but the network of belief that fed the temple's power was fraying. The rites of that final night were performed with exceptional care, perhaps as a silent offering to memory itself. When the god's statue was awakened, the gestures were slower, more deliberate. The hymns carried an undertone of farewell, though no such word was spoken. The battle against Apophis was enacted with the same ritual strikes, but the thought lingered in some hearts. Would this victory matter if there were no priests left to fight again tomorrow night? Even the small, ordinary details seemed sharpened by awareness. The oil poured into the eternal lamp glistened more brightly. The scent of Kai-Fi incense was richer, more bittersweet. The sound of the cords being tied around the sanctuary doors rang louder in the quiet. Each act carried the weight of knowing it might be the last time these hands would perform it. As dawn approached, the final hymn before sunrise rose into the air. It drifted through the temple's courts, mingling with the first light. Beyond the walls, traders were already moving in the streets, soldiers marching to foreign orders, and children growing up in a world where the night magic of the temple was no longer the center of life. When the hymn ended, the priests completed the purge of the first light, as they always had. But this time, as they stepped back and let the day take hold, the knowledge settled silently among them. The cycle might not continue tomorrow. The god might not be awakened again in the same way. The temple would remain, its walls still standing against the desert wind, but the living heartbeat of its nightly service was ending. And so the last night passed, not with ceremony or proclamation, but with the quiet dignity of a tradition fulfilling itself one final time, before yielding to the new dawn. Though the last full service of the old temples faded into memory, the spirit of the night rites never vanished completely. Fragments of the tradition lived on, sometimes openly, sometimes disguised, carried by those who had once walked the shadowed halls with incense in their hands. Egypt's temples might have lost their central place in the kingdom's daily life, but echoes of their sacred nights continued to hum in quieter, hidden places. Some of the surviving practices found refuge in smaller local shrines. These were humbler structures compared to the grand sanctuaries of Karnak or Luxor, yet they kept a flicker of the ancient order alive. Priests, often the sons or grandsons of those who had served in the great temples, still performed abbreviated versions of the midnight rites. They lit lamps in the darkness, whispered the old hymns, and poured libations for the gods, even if they lacked the full regalia or the wealth of offerings that once filled the great courts. Other elements were absorbed into new religious forms. When foreign gods took prominence, their rituals sometimes adopted the rhythm and structure of the Egyptian night service. The practice of purifying before worship, the careful lighting of a sacred flame, the chanting of divine names at specific hours, these patterns endured because they were deeply woven into Egypt's sense of how one should approach the sacred, regardless of the god being honored. Even outside the temples, traces of the tradition could be found in folk customs. In rural villages, families sometimes lit small lamps on certain nights of the year, placing them in doorways or near household shrines. Elders explained that the lamps were for protection, or to keep the darkness away, repeating phrases that were direct descendants of the temple's protective invocations. In some cases, these customs were kept without full understanding of their origins. The act itself had become the meaning. The symbolic battle against chaos also survived in altered form. Farmers might burn small effigies or scatter ashes in their fields at the end of a season, an echo of the priestly destruction of Apophis's image. To them, it was a way to clear away bad luck and make space for the next year's harvest. Yet the bones of the ritual were the same, to confront disorder in symbolic form and declare that order would prevail. Even the art of dream reading lingered. Though the official temple practice waned, wise men and women in towns and villages still listened to dreams with seriousness, interpreting them using symbols that could be traced back to the papyri once stored in temple archives. They might no longer sleep in the shadow of a god's statue, but the belief that the divine speaks in dreams never lost its power. For those who remembered, each of these fragments was more than a relic. It was a thread connecting the present to the deep past. They knew that even if the grand night vigils no longer filled the air with chant and incense, the essence of those nights could still be felt. It lived in the lamplight spilling into the dark, in the quiet breath before a prayer, in the steady conviction that night, however deep, was never without its guardians. Centuries after the temples had gone silent, the memory of Egypt's night rites still held a strange magnetism. Scholars, mystics, and occultists, many far removed from the Nile, looked to the fragments of ancient practice and saw in them not relics, but keys. In dusty manuscripts, museum relics, and half-remembered folk customs, they sought the secrets of the priests who once kept vigil while the world slept. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the rise of Western occult movements sparked a revival of interest. Secret societies wove Egyptian symbols into their ceremonies, claiming lineage from the lost priesthood. Their rites often included midnight vigils, the lighting of a single sacred lamp, and the recitation of divine names drawn from hieroglyphic inscriptions. While their understanding was filtered through modern mysticism, the intention to connect with an unseen order echoed the purpose of the original temple nights. Some modern practitioners focused on magical correspondences. They experimented with incense blends inspired by Kefi recipes, created wax figures for symbolic banishment rituals, and adapted Egyptian hymns for personal meditation. Though lacking the full cultural and religious framework of ancient Egypt, they believed that even fragments of the old formulae could open channels to the same timeless forces. Egypt itself became a stage for spiritual tourism. Travellers stood among the moonlit ruins of Karnak or Luxor, convinced they could feel the vibrations of ancient chants still humming in the stones. Some staged their own improvised rites in the shadow of fallen pylons, seeking to reactivate the energy of the temple. Whether these acts truly echoed the past or simply projected longing onto it, the night hours in Egypt's sacred places retained their power to stir imagination. For modern magicians, the allure lay not only in the symbols, but in the structure, the slow progression from purification to invocation to offering to sealing the night's work. In a restless age, the deliberate pace of the Egyptian vigil was itself a form of magic, a way to step outside the noise of the world and into a rhythm aligned with the turning of the stars. And so, in candlelit rooms or under desert skies, fragments of the old night magic live on. They may no longer be spoken in flawless Middle Egyptian or performed in the presence of a god statue, but they carry forward the same essential act, to stand in the darkness and keep the ancient watch, trusting that the dawn will come. Even now, long after the last priest sealed the sanctuary doors, there are nights when the moon's light falls in such a way that it feels as if the old summons still lingers. It spills across quiet courtyards, glints on still water, and touches ancient stones with the same silver it cast thousands of years ago. The temples may stand silent, their sanctuaries empty, yet something in that light whispers to anyone who lingers. The watch is not over. The pull of the moon is older than Egypt itself. To the ancient priests, it was a silent overseer, marking the hours of purification, guiding the timing of hymns, casting its gaze over the sacred offerings. Even without human voices to answer it, the moon still keeps its course, as if expecting the rituals to resume at any moment. Its call is softer now, but no less real to those who listen. In remote places, travellers sometimes pause under its glow and feel the faint echo of the temple rhythm. They may not know the words of the chants or the precise gestures, but a hush falls over them, as if some unspoken agreement has been reached between light and shadow. The impulse to stand still, to honour the moment, is as instinctive now as it was in the days of linen-clad vigils. The moon's call is not only about memory, It is about continuity, the reminder that night is not emptiness, but a space in which order is renewed. Whether through the disciplined watch of a priest or the quiet attention of a lone observer, the act of marking the night affirms a connection to the cycles that hold the world together. Perhaps that is the lasting legacy of Egypt's midnight rites. Not the exact words or the formulae of incense and offerings, but the awareness that the night is alive and that it has its keepers. Once they were many. Now they are scattered, a handful of historians, mystics, wanderers and dreamers who feel the weight of the moon's gaze and answer it in their own way. And so the moon still calls, as it always has. Whether anyone stands in the old temple courts to hear it is less important than the fact that the call remains, waiting for any who will keep the watch until dawn.